part of that presentation. It's the difference between coming off as professional, informed, and friendly, or coming off like that guy who stood up and walked up to the beginning of the room at the beginning of this presentation. Style is important for your presentation. And then the second reason style is important for email is that it can actually make or break your message. When we all know what a good email looks like. It reads well, it's pleasant, you know what the point is, and all of the points build on each other in a way that's logical and convincing. A bad email just leaves you confused. We've all gotten an email from somebody that had at least one sentence that made you think, I don't even know what this guy's trying to say to me. And that's bad because it defeats the point of email, which David said is to be able to put all your information in an email, send it off, and then have the recipient read it and say, I know what the point is, I know what this guy wants me to think. And if they're having to email back for clarification, you might as well have just gone and had a conversation with them face to face. It would have been easier. So now that we've established that style is important for email, let's look at a few of the finer points on how to have it. Number one, you need to cut the fat. If there's a paragraph, a sentence, or a word that doesn't tangibly advance your message, it's better that you just take it out. People don't want to spend more than a minute or two reading an email. They have a lot to get through in the day. So, make it concise, and they will know that you're respecting your time. Second, get to your point quickly. In Made to Stick this week, the authors talked about inverted pyramid. It's a strategy for writing journalistic stories, and what it means is you put your most important information at the top of the story. And it's the same deal when you're writing an email. Your first and second sentence of your email should contain the who, the what, the when, the where, and the why. And in reading that, your recipient should be able to say right off the bat, I know what this email's about, I know what this person wants from me. Third, you need to watch your tone. We've already talked about how tone is very important when you're giving a presentation or speaking, and it makes up a very big portion of your communication. It's the same way through writing. Unfortunately, writing tone is very hard to nail down. It's very hard to just know how to describe because it's your own voice. But the best way you can ensure that you're having a good tone and sounding professional is just to read over your email after you write it and say, is this coming off the way that I want it to? And while you're reading for tone, you also want to proofread your email. You want to check and make sure that you spelled the recipient's name right. That's just you can't sacrifice that. You need to make sure you're using punctuation correctly, that you don't have sentence fragments, and that you don't have any other misspellings. And again, just read through and make sure it sounds well, it reads well, and it's logically constructed. Now, after most people finish writing the content of their email, they think about adding a little bit of text formatting. But the first strategy with text formatting is you don't want to use too much of it. You don't want every other word to be bold or italicized or, God forbid, all caps. That's never a good thing. Or colored. You want to use it sparingly because your words should be able to stand on their own. If that's not the case, then you might think about writing it and making it a little more concise. Then you need to make sure you have a sign-on and a sign-off. Address your recipient at the top, spell his or her name right, and then at the bottom just say sincerely or thanks, something professional and clean, and then your name. And finally, make sure you have a subject line. That's about the most annoying thing that can happen is you get an email that just says no subject. So when you have 30 messages in your inbox, you need to be able to prioritize, and how you do that is through the subject line. The subject lines are pretty easy. You just say like the point of your email and then what you want the person to get out of this, why they should read it. If you think of those two things, you should be able to come up with something that's concise and clear. And if you can't answer those questions, then it's debatable that you should be sending an email anyway. So now that we know how to draft, edit, and format our emails, David's going to give us a few points on what you need to do before you hit send.
All right, now before you hit send, you need to make sure that you follow the 30-minute rule. That's critical. Let the email that you just wrote sit in your inbox for about 30 minutes. It allows you to take a step back, compose yourself, and then look at it again with fresh eyes. So you want to review it. You want to move on, and you want to make sure that it ensures proper tone. You want to make sure that there aren't any typos. And you want to make sure that your recipient is spelled correctly, as Derek mentioned. Also, you want to make sure that you're using the correct recipient field. You have three options: your BCC, CC, and the direct recipient or the to field. Now, with the blind courtesy copy, you want to make sure that you really focus on long lists. That's for a lot of people because you don't want to publish their emails to the entire list. It keeps their confidentiality. Now, with CC, it's courtesy copy, so you want to keep members of a team updated on the workflow. So if something happens, people need to know about it, but you don't want to clutter their inboxes too much. Now with the direct to field, that's for that one-way communication. Like all email should be, it should just be one way, letting someone know that a meeting's happening, where it is, and when to be there. It's simple and it's clear. Now another thing you want to do is you want to watch your file size. We've all gotten a video attachment that's 400 megabytes and it just bogs down the system. No one wants that to happen. If you want to slow down the system, there are better ways. Your video probably isn't even that funny in the first place, and if it's great, share it with a link, upload it to YouTube, do all of those things. It's much simpler, and it makes things easier for everyone else without slowing down the office. Finally, you want to respect the inbox. If you respect the inbox, your colleagues will respect you. Don't clutter their inboxes, and they won't clutter yours. Don't send around chain messages. We've all got that one where you're going to die if you don't do something, but it's never happened. I've never responded. I'm pretty sure you haven't either. All right. One thing you want to make sure is that you remember email is forever. Email never goes away. Email has sunk companies, it's sunk careers. Don't let it ruin yours. Don't let that happen. You want to respect colleagues' confidentiality by keeping the private things private. That's where they should be. If you're in doubt, confront them face to face. Have a face-to-face meeting with someone and talk these things out. Don't just let it kind of slip off in an email, get archived on a server, because that can be bad and it can have negative repercussions. All right. One last thing, never underestimate brevity. It's critical. It's concise. Now I'm going to turn it over to Derek for a few wrap-up points.
All right, so first, remember, email is presentation. What you put in that message is how the other person's going to see you. And you don't have any chance to go back and take stuff out after you send it. So make sure you get it right the first time. Part of getting it right is having good style. It goes into that presentation, and then it can also make or break your message depending on how you do it. Third, make sure you use formatting sparingly. Your words should be able to stand on your own, and you want your message to look clean and not cluttered. Finally, respect the inbox of your colleagues. Don't clutter their inbox, and you're not going to be that guy in the office. Your colleagues will know you're professional and respectful. And finally, David has one last thing.
Yeah, in conclusion, you want to channel your inner Hemingway. All of you literary majors know what I'm talking about. Hemingway's colleagues once challenged him to write a short story in just 6 words. He had 6 words, and he conveyed it with such style and such force that he considered it his best work. Now, I'm not asking you to cut all of your emails down to 6 words, because we all know that's not going to happen. But take that as a good starting point. Put your best foot forward and answer emails concisely, with style, and just do them in a very exemplary way, and take that point from today onward. Now, I know we've mentioned a lot of specifics in this presentation. Do you guys have any specific questions?
Okay, so let's thank these guys for their...
What were the 6 words?
6 words were baby shoes, new, never used. I think never been used. So conveys a lot of tone, a lot of gravity, conveys a whole story. So.
That's interesting.
What do you guys think about using exclamation points?
Again, that's one of those things that you need to know what type of email you're sending. Like, if it's to your house. Now, I mean, what we're talking about here is mostly in a business setting. I mean, any of you are in a house, which all you know those house chains can get pretty crazy. So it's a little different level on that sort of thing. It's another thing where you have to know what sort of tone you're trying to adopt for this. All right. An exclamation mark generally just means excitement. You don't want to use it in like an angry way. It just depends on what you're using exclamation mark for.
Yes.
What if you write an email to somebody and you're it's very formal, you've got great email etiquette, and they respond and there's none of it? Like, for example, my boss, when he uses email, he uses it just to communicate like the bare necessities because he doesn't have time to write, "Dear Kaz, thank you, Paul," So when he does that, do I write back with all the formality as well and maintain my formality, or do I write it the way that he's writing?
Well, this is kind of one of your take your cues things. At my previous job, I had a situation like that where my boss didn't really know how to use email. So he would shoot off these no subject, no introduction, no closing, just questions. Typically what I would do is just cut it down to Mr. Jenke, comma, short body of message, best, David. No signature, nothing cluttering it up. So you've got your message, which is the longest line, and you've got a couple short lines to offset it with the formalities, but nothing too big. So, yeah, it is.
How do you know when to use Mr. and Mrs.? Because currently we're college students, so we should be addressing our authorities with Mr. and Mrs. But when someone constantly writes back as, hey, or signs it Chris, do you start addressing him as Chris as opposed to Mr. Shanley when he's constantly introducing you as that? Or when does that change?
Yeah, I mean, that's where you take your cues. You want to start off as formal as you can be, and then let the other person talk you down. If they're signing it Chris, usually that's okay to respond with Chris. But that's just where you want to make sure you address formally at first, and then if they're consistently responding that way, then you might want to, it's safe to start using that.
Yeah, and building on that a little bit, with what Cass said about his job, if he's your boss, you know if he's married probably, and if you don't know your boss well enough, and you know kind of like the situation, so you can look at that. You can always put a Mr. in front of the last name. For guys, we kind of do that anyway. For girls, it's like a formality, and that's fine unless you know your boss really well. But if it's just colleagues, like the guy across the hall in the cubicle, if he's addressing himself as Chris and calling you just David, feel free to follow suit. Yeah, Edward.
This is something that you didn't directly touch on, but Outlook Web Access, which other people outside Kings use, and just the program Outlook, have a lot of like other settings, high importance, low importance, mark it as personal or confidential, all those other kind of random things that some people use and some people don't. What would you recommend with all that kind of extra stuff?
I can take that. Well, from what I read, it seems like most people don't know what that is anyway, because there's a lot of tutorials online that say this is your confidential, this is your high importance. When you look at those type of things, make sure that you're aware of them, so familiarize yourself with the program. But if you're sending an email out to your colleagues, don't expect them to open it sooner if it's high importance, because it's not the top one on their list. If it's not the most recent one or it doesn't have a compelling subject line, it's not going to do anything. So you use the subject line and use the body of the message to convey high importance and confidentiality. Crystal?
Do you have any advice on subject lines? Because like one thing that my house president is really good at is like saying in the subject line what is in the content of the message, or should it just be like a general title?
Yeah.
Yeah, it should be maybe the five or fewer words that communicate the essence of your piece. That's what's going to communicate best to the people who need to be reading it, and that's what's going to really draw them in. The best way to not get your email read is to not have a good, accurate subject line, or just a really general one. Those ones don't work either. Yes.
What about closing emails? Like for example, I just emailed my boss like a couple days ago, and it wasn't business related, but he's still my boss, and I still respect him, and I still want to be polite. So I emailed him, and he responded, but should I email back with like "You're welcome, bye," you know, or something like that? Like, how do you know when? Basically, how do you know when the email ends or the conversation ends, or do you need to send an email that ends it?
Yeah, typically, like if you feel like you could respond to his email and it would add to it, or it would just be, a good way to kind of close it off, because he's not going to respond back to your email and be like, oh, that's my, my intern or my employee who's just saying, bye, I don't need to respond to that. But as an employee, you may feel obligated to, thank him for his time, and if you're going to see him like the next day, feel free to shoot it off, kind of later at night, and he'll, catch it the next morning, and then you'll be there, so he's not going to have to, work up a response. But, if it's something basic, if it's not work-related, and he kind of closes it out, you don't have to go and close it out again, and just use a whole message for that. So, yeah.
Okay, so I'm